Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Cards on the Table, a new podcast by the Referees Association. My name's Joe Larkin. I'm delighted today to be joined by Dr. Tom Webb, who is a lecturer in sports management at the University of Portsmouth. Hi Tom, how are you doing?
Hi Joe, yeah, good, thanks. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, no worries at all. So we're here today to discuss the topical issues that have been going on in refereeing over the past 10 days. Started off with some abhorrent abuse of Mike Dean. What are your thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah, obviously, that's been a real topic of debate over the last few days since the story broke. And as you say, Joe, I mean, the abuse that Mike Dean and his family have received obviously led to him having to, withdraw from service effectively, and not officiate matches, in the short term is just completely unacceptable. I think there are wider issues with social media. We've seen racial abuse of prominent players over the last few months and years, and I'm aware of the letter that's been written to some of those social media platforms, including signatories from the Premier League, the FA, and also representatives of PGMOL and things like that, from a refereeing perspective. And I think that's good. I think we need to draw attention to some of these issues, and it sort of lends itself to abuse more generally, really. And I think the cloak of anonymity that people can hide behind on some of the platforms is clearly meaning that they feel like they can say whatever they want, they can act however they want, irrespective of the feelings or harm that it does to the individual that's aimed at, or their families, in the case of Mike Dean. And I think obviously that you never want to see things like that, but unfortunately I'm never surprised, particularly when these things are aimed at referees. And certainly the research we've done, the latest publication where we considered female referees and their understanding and experience of mental health in football, they brought up about the issue of social media, albeit at a more local or regional level, but that it was a particular problem. Now they were talking from the perspective of players that they might know that would message them before or after a game, more often than not male players, potentially saying or addressing them in ways that they didn't feel comfortable with, saying some inappropriate things. And so when this happened with Mike Dean, given it had also happened a couple of years before with Michael Oliver as well, with social media, after he officiated in the Champions League, and he and his wife suffered very similar levels of abuse through social media, I wasn't surprised. And I you worry about the impact on Mike Dean as an individual, and I'm sure that PGMOL are providing that support for him and his family, which obviously is vitally important. And you worry about then the knock-on effect, not just on him, but on other referees potentially as well. What impact will it have on people that maybe are thinking about becoming a referee, or who are referees already? Will it put people off? Will it make people think twice about continuing? So I think it's the issues are quite wide ranging, and as I say, we've seen some of these issues previously in the research we've done, and as I say, unfortunately, I wasn't surprised when news of the story broke.
So is it something that you think that when we resume grassroots football here in the UK, that it'll have a trickle-down effect on the game?
I think that's a distinct possibility. I mean, we won't know if it's this specifically. I think. Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult thing to measure, how the top of the game affects the game lower down. However, in numerous research studies that we've done, referees or officials in other sports as well have identified that that they think that there is a link, and that if something happens at the top of the game that's televised, more often than not, they think that it impacts negatively on behaviour in subsequent weeks, lower down on Saturdays and Sundays in local football, for example. Now, I would say that the best people to judge whether that is having an effect are those people that are experiencing it. The people that are officiating these games, that are going out and refereeing, and they're saying that they think there's a link between behaviour at the top of the game and behaviour lower down. Now, as I say, it's really difficult to measure that, but my concern is we might see, issues around abuse. And again, we saw when football restarted after the last lockdown that those issues haven't gone away. There were some quite high profile examples that were caught on video, and people were prosecuted as a result of that. But they were high profile incidents that were shown throughout, the UK on social media, on media platforms as well. And again, that isn't going to have a positive effect. It's not going to be received in a positive way if referees are receiving those sorts of, physically abusive actions during a match. It's something that can't help the situation. So again, I would go back to, if someone's thinking about officiating, are they going to see incidents like that? Are they going to see some of the media reports about what happened to Mike Dean and think, do I need this? Equally, if someone is a registered and qualified referee, are they going to think, well, do I want to go back? Actually, maybe I don't. If some of these things are are issues that I've encountered in the past, and maybe it's going to get worse. And I think that's where the support is really, really important, not just for Mike Dean, as I've talked about, but for any referee who is subjected to any form of abuse, whether that's verbal or physical on the field of play, whether that's through social media, however that manifests itself, the support around those individuals is vital. And that's why I was really, really pleased to see the FA launch the Mental Health Champions pilot. I think that's fantastic, and anything we can do to provide that support if someone needs it. And that might not just be from abuse. There are lots of other areas that might require support as well for referees. And I'm really hopeful that scheme is well received, well utilised, and that it rolls out, nationally. I think that would be a really positive move. And I know, it won't solve all the problems, and we need to address some of those problems that we're talking about really at the point in which they occur. The Mental Health Champions scheme, whilst really good, and a lot of the training and development opportunities, whilst good through the RA or through county FAs, are positive. But we really want to stop the issues before we need to learn how to deal with them. If we can stop them in the first place, stop them at source, then I think that'll help certainly the individuals involved or potentially involved, but also recruitment and retention. And let's not forget that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and recruitment and retention is particularly difficult at the moment, not just in football but in other sports for officials as well. I mean, courses can't run how they normally would run in terms of recruiting new and young referees. And also the retention of these officials is more and more difficult with the increased number of enforced breaks that we have. If you think generally throughout a season, we have one enforced off season. The season ends, and then what tends to happen is we hope that the recruitment sort of levels off in terms of the numbers we recruit and the numbers that leave the game, basically, in terms of referees. And over the last few years, it's remained relatively static at around 28,000 referees. The worry is that with 2, 3, 4 essentially manufactured off seasons because of COVID-19 and lockdowns, that those issues become increased, and the opportunity for dropout becomes enhanced because people are not officiating, they're not playing as well. It also affects players as well. Will fewer people come back and play? Will fewer people come back and officiate? It's a real concern. And then, of course, you add into that when we can then start recruiting people and getting them out, doing the practical aspects and getting them officiating again, the landscape is very different to what people were used to or coming into 18 months ago. The game is is very different with COVID-19, and the protocols around fixtures and social distancing and what's required of referees is enhanced at the moment due to those COVID-19 procedures. So I think there's a number of issues there that are interlinked, which may well impact upon referees lower down, and at all levels of the game, but also on recruitment and retention.
So would you be able to touch upon some of your previous research and some of the current research you're doing around match officials and match official abuse?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been looking at abuse for a number of years now. I actually started looking at officiating and actually abuse as part of the project back in 2004, 2005 with the FA at the time. And the research we did was a precursor to the Respect programme, and it sort of fed into that as a alongside other metrics to sort of help them form that programme. Over the last few years, since about 2015, we've revisited abuse as an issue in football and other sports. And we've published quite widely on that at various levels of the game and also in different countries as well. So we've considered whether the trends in abuse are something that are unique to the UK, and they're not. We've worked with UEFA and the Dutch and French FAs on a research project looking at these trends of abuse across different countries, across national boundaries and borders. And we found that many of these trends exist in different countries that we've also seen in England. And of course, there are differences between the countries. And for example, the frequency of abuse is different. The numbers of those that abused differ between countries and things like that, if we're looking at percentages. But actually, the underlying trends, the things that referees are telling us and match officials are telling us in other sports, are similar in many instances. And this is things about, the prevalence of abuse, the support networks around them, whether that's formal or informal, training and development opportunities, disciplinary processes. All of these things we can sort of start to map and see these trends, and different countries deal with these things differently. I noticed Paul in the first of these podcasts talked about the Netherlands and their response to abuse. We've done a lot of work in the Netherlands, so I'm well aware of the tragedy that occurred there a few years ago, of the assistant referee that lost their life after a youth fixture. And that has affected and impacted the policy and approach to abuse that they take in the Netherlands, as you would expect, given something as terrible as that occurring. And, that is absolutely not what you want. We don't want to get to that stage where that happens. And I think this is where I'm talking about addressing the issues at the sort of, where they occur. And what's really important for me, and we focused on this more recently in the research, is that many of these things are joined up. And what I mean by that is, yes, I'm looking at it and we're talking about it from a refereeing perspective and increasing, the support for referees and addressing abuse for referees and these sorts of things. And abuse is not the only issue. Of course, there are other things which I've touched upon about support and issues around support networks and disciplinary processes and family ties and time and things like that are all issues. But if we address these things at a local level and at their source, that also improves the situation for players, for coaches, for spectators. It improves the playing environment more generally. And referees don't operate in a vacuum. They don't operate in isolation. They operate as part of the game with players, spectators, and coaches. All of these groups are interlinked. Whether we like it or not, they are interlinked. So recently, when we've looked at this, and particularly in the book, which we published in late 2020, we started trying to draw these links between improving the operational environment and the playing environment for everyone. Yes, we're looking at it from a refereeing perspective, but of course it has knock-on effects with those other groups as well. And I think that's really important to understand. And that's something they're trying to do in the Netherlands, which is why I've sort of mentioned that. And in the book, we try and look at, particularly towards the end of the book, evidence of good practice in dealing with abuse and supporting match officials and things like that. And the Netherlands has introduced and piloted a number of different initiatives that have really helped reduce abuse there. They still have over 50% of referees saying that they've been abused in some way, but that's far fewer than in England, and the frequency is much less in the Netherlands. So the number of times an individual referee would have received abuse per season is less than it is in England, for example. So, some of these things do work, but it takes time as well. And I also think we need to talk much more across different countries. What's worked in the Netherlands, what's worked in France, what's worked in Italy, what hasn't worked, what's worked in England but hasn't worked there. Let's share this information. If this is a problem that is evident in other countries, which it is, which our research tells us that it is, let's share information. Let's look at what can be done to improve the situation, and also what's been tried and hasn't worked, so we don't repeat those same mistakes. And of course, we can also do that across sports. We looked at sports on the other side of the world in hockey in Australia, for example, and found evidence of good practice. Again, we should be able to share these examples, and I think that's really, really important. And on that note, what we're doing at the moment in terms of the research, we've got a number of projects we're working on. One of them, which the RA has helped with in England, has been a recent survey which we've got out at the moment, which everyone watching this hopefully has received that email. And if you haven't done the survey, please do it. It will really help. And that survey is operating in England, Australia, and Canada. And again, we're trying to look at the impact of COVID. We're trying to look at the experience of referees in those different countries. We're trying to look at the impact of culture, and try and understand a bit more what's going on, particularly at the moment when things are so difficult, across the world with the pandemic that we're all operating within. And we're trying to play as much football or sport as we can within those parameters, and referees are trying to officiate when they're allowed to, albeit in different circumstances. And so this research is really important. We're hoping to learn, a lot of new information. I mean, it's never been looked at in this way before. The research like this has never been done. So we think it'll be, really, really important, and we'll learn some hopefully extremely useful information, which can be then utilised by organisations like the RA, like the organisations we're working with in Australia and Canada as well. And of course, in other areas of the world, this will translate to different countries, to really help and inform about what's happening in officiating at the moment.